As we all know, death is inevitable. No one, no matter how powerful or weak, can escape it. And with death comes what many consider to be the afterlife. But what happens after we die? Does everyone go to the same place? Or are there different paths that our souls travel down? If you've ever wondered where exactly your soul may end up, when your time here on Earth has come to an end, then today's video is for you. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Night Forge. In this video, we will be taking a look at 3 divine realms, Elysium, Tartarus, and the Asphodel meadows, and discussing what awaits those who entered these places. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. In Greek mythology, upon death, every soul was judged by the god Hades in his great hall known as the Elysian Fields. This was also known as the Hall of the Blessed Dead. Here, Hades would determine whether the person was worthy of going to Elysium or not. Elysium was basically paradise, where the dead could live a life of luxury and comfort and be surrounded by beauty and pleasure. Only the most heroic and virtuous of souls were allowed to enter Elysium. It was said that once inside, you could enjoy endless parties and feasts, have romantic trysts, hunt wild game, and do pretty much whatever you wanted. You could even converse with the gods themselves. On the other hand, if Hades felt that you weren't quite worthy of going to Elysium, then he would send you to Tartarus. This place was basically the opposite of Elysium. It was a dark, dank, and miserable realm where the dead were tormented both physically and mentally. The punishments in Tartarus were endless and varied depending on what you had done in life. Some of the more common ones included being chained up, being forced to eat disgusting things, and having your organs ripped out one by one. Basically, if you had done anything bad in your life, you could expect to be punished for it in Tartarus. Finally, if Hades didn't think that you were evil enough to go to Tartarus, but still not good enough for Elysium, then he would send you to the Asphodel meadows. This place was basically a holding area for souls that were neither good nor bad. It was a very boring and uneventful place, and those who ended up here were often forgotten about. Now, while this system may seem a bit harsh, it's actually much more nuanced than that. In reality, there were ways to get into Elysium, even if you weren't particularly heroic or virtuous. For example, if you were related to one of the gods, you were much more likely to end up in Elysium than someone who wasn't. This was because the gods had a lot of power over the realm, and often used it to help out their loved ones. Additionally, if you had done something good in your life, no matter how small, you were more likely to end up in Elysium than someone who hadn't. This meant that even people who weren't necessarily good could still end up in Elysium, if they did one major heroic deed before they died. Now, conversely, there were also ways to avoid Tartarus, even if you were really bad. For example, if you were related to one of the gods, again, you were much more likely to avoid Tartarus than someone who wasn't. This was because the gods could intercede on behalf of their loved ones, and often did. Additionally, if you had done something good in your life, no matter how small, you were less likely to end up in Tartarus than someone who hadn't. This meant that even people who were generally bad could avoid Tartarus, if they managed to do one good thing before they died. The Asphodel meadows, however, were a bit different. This place was meant for people who were neither good nor bad, and so there was no way to get into Elysium or avoid Tartarus by doing good deeds here. However, it is important to remember that the Asphodel meadows were largely forgotten about. This meant that people who ended up here often just kind of faded away into nothingness. They were neither punished nor rewarded, neither remembered nor forgotten. Now that we've established the basics of this system, let's take a closer look at each of the realms. First, let's start with Elysium. As I mentioned before, Elysium was basically paradise. It was a place of beauty, pleasure, and comfort. The weather was always perfect. The food was delicious and the company was great. There was never any pain or suffering in Elysium, and the only emotions that were felt here were happiness and contentment. Those who entered Elysium were considered to be the luckiest of the dead. They had truly earned their place here by living good lives and doing heroic deeds. Once inside, they could do pretty much whatever they wanted, and there was no danger. It was a place where they could finally relax and enjoy themselves after a long life of hard work. Next, let's take a look at Tartarus. As I mentioned before, Tartarus was basically the opposite of Elysium. It was a place of pain, suffering, and torment. The weather was always terrible, the food was disgusting, and the company was horrible. There was never any happiness or contentment in Tartarus, and the only emotions that were felt here were fear and despair. Those who entered Tartarus were considered to be the worst of the dead. They had done bad things in their lives and deserved to be punished for them. Once inside, they were tortured both physically and mentally, and there was no escape. It was a place where they were forced to suffer for eternity as punishment for their sins. Finally, let's take a look at the Asphodel Meadows. As I mentioned before, the Asphodel Meadows was basically a holding area for souls that were neither good nor bad. The weather here was usually boring, the food was bland, and the company was forgettable. There was never any happiness or sadness in the Asphodel Meadows, and the only emotion that was felt here was boredom. Those who ended up in the Asphodel Meadows were considered to be neither lucky nor unlucky. They had lived neither good nor bad lives, and so they were neither rewarded nor punished. Once here, they basically just kind of faded away into nothingness. So now you know what awaits you in the afterlife according to Greek mythology. It's up to you to decide whether or not you want to try and end up in Elysium, avoid Tartarus, or just end up in the Asphodel Meadows. No matter what you choose, though, you should have a pretty good idea of what to expect when you die. Now, some of you might be wondering why we even need to go through all this in the first place. After all, isn't the afterlife supposed to be a reward for a good life? Or isn't it supposed to be a punishment for a bad life? Well, the answer to that question actually varies depending on who you ask. Some people believe that the afterlife is a reward for a good life and a punishment for a bad life. They believe that we are all judged after we die and sent to either heaven or hell based on how we lived our lives. Others, however, believe that the afterlife is simply a continuation of our lives here on earth. They believe that when we die, we are reborn into another life and that this cycle continues on and on. Still others believe that there is no afterlife at all and that when we die, we simply cease to exist. So ultimately, what do you believe? Is there an afterlife? If so, what do you think happens after we die? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as for me, I'm still kind of on the fence about all this. I mean, I've seen and heard some pretty convincing arguments for all three sides. And honestly, I don't think anyone really knows what happens after we die. All we can do is speculate. One thing I will say though is that I hope I end up in Elysium when I die. I mean, who wouldn't want to go to a place of eternal happiness and pleasure? But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Thank you guys so much for watching. That's all for this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of my videos. And if you want to learn more about Greek mythology, I highly recommend checking out some of my other videos. I've got a ton of information on all sorts of topics, so there's sure to be something for everyone. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.